named Josh. This is just kind of a follow-up. But the question to ask your plumber is, should the pressure on this particular system be allowed to go down on its own? I've checked all of your toilets and nothing is running there. But your pressure does drop from around 45 down to about 30 throughout the day, which indicates that this line, which is your pressure line, this is your pressure switch that sends pressure to this, or I should say that this here sends pressure to this and tells this switch when to disengage, right? So put it together, it starts, the pressure builds up through this line, pushes up on these springs to the point where it gets enough pressure, and then it pushes up on the springs, which separates these two terminals and stops the pump. Which, by the way, happens right at about 45 pounds. I'm just going to let it go through the process until you can see how it mechanically activates. Getting close. Okay, and then the pressure in this black pressure line gets to the point where it shuts this off. Now, let's say that since this is stopped at 45, let's make believe you wanted this to shut off at 55, or even more typically 60. Okay, that pressurizes all these lines, which translates into more pressure in the house. You don't want to go more than that, just for being prudent. Okay, so if you wanted this here to actually shut off at a later or a higher pressure, you would turn only this small one. Again, keeping in mind that if you touch that little metal terminal behind, it's going to zap you. So you grab this and do nice little turns, just quarter turn at a time. And that would then shut your system down later. But the question is whether or not this pump has enough oomph to actually get it up to that point. If it did not, then what would happen is this pump would just keep cycling and cycling and cycling, never able to attain its requested goal of higher than 45. And this pump is older, so I would imagine that that's why they've got it set down where it's set. Okay? So that's your pressure switch. By the way, if you wanted the whole spectrum of this, okay, it starts at around 25 or 30, maybe about 20, and shuts off around 40. And that's a common setup for these pumps, is between 20 and 40 pounds of pressure. It goes on. If you wanted to change the whole spectrum so that it started higher and stopped later, you would turn just this guy right here. This controls when it starts and stops as a whole. Okay, so it's kind of like you would take the gauge and move it this way or that way. Would be dependent on whether or not you turn this switch clockwise or counterclockwise. This smaller post with the spring on it only changes when it shuts off, whether it shuts off at a higher pressure or at a lower pressure. But it will still start at the same pressure whether you have that set at 20 or 30. Okay, and when I was trying to learn these systems, that was more of the difficult side of understanding how it all worked. It wasn't until I just fiddled with it a little bit and it made it a lot easier. Okay, the one remaining unknown for me, where I'm a little bit outside of my scope of knowledge, is in Hawaii, for the catchment tanks, we only ever see one intake line. Okay, and what Corey's telling me is anytime you see a pump that has 2, that's an indication that you've got all your water coming in from a deep water well. Okay, but the other thing that he pointed out that I would fully agree with is there should be a check valve somewhere in your line, here or here. Since there's no check valve, it means it's someplace else farther down the line. And he thinks one of those check valves is failing. His recommendation would be to get somebody in here who knows what they're doing and actually put a check valve here, closer to the system, with a valve that you can isolate if you have to fix the valve in the future, the check valve. So you put a valve here, a check valve here, and or vice versa. If your well is up above the house and you have to worry about gravity, then you'd put the valve on this side. But in any case, a check valve here may keep the pressure from going down. Okay. Right now it seems to be holding pretty good, but this pump does start and stop throughout the day, which means water is going someplace. The question that I can't answer, at least right now until I talk to a plumber out in this area, is do they have it designed that way so that water never sits in one spot for too long and has the potential of freezing? I have no idea. But at the very least, check valves here would be a really good idea. Or here, wherever your plumber would thought would be the easiest.